Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Michael Dane, Interim Economic Development Director. Our theme for priorities is planes, trains, and automobiles. So jumping right into planes, Project Skyline has been in the works for a while. We've signed a contract this year, public-private partnership. The public side of the dollars, $3 million in a commitment from COSA DC. That is a fixed commitment. As prices vary, they are responsible for the amounts that it's going to take above the $3 million. So they control their fate somewhat to the extent that they can value engineer against the inflationary pressures. And they also control, to a great extent, the construction schedule and methods. That's on them. They will construct, and they will pay, and we will reimburse for up to $3 million. Very excited about this project. It will renovate the GTE hangar, a fixture at our airport for a long time, put it back into use. I was told once the best way to preserve an old building is to upfit it so it can be currently used and in an everyday fashion. So we're excited about that. There will be new construction on the air side. The FBO part of the facility will be all new, and they will construct that.
A projected timing on that, Michael?
We signed the contract, and we hear that their contractor is working through the permitting process or the planning process in advance of the permitting process. I don't know specifically where they're at. I think they want to move within a year and be operating, but I would be surprised if it moved that quickly, but that's very much in their hands. It has moved a little slow because the leadership, the ownership at Skyline they have multiple business interests, and they've had some mergers and acquisitions, I think, during the last year that had their attention somewhat. But Project Skyline is exciting. We are glad to see it moving forward, and we think it's going to be a great addition to the airport. Go
back those bottom line things. So add new, Tom, to your point, add new parking facilities, general use parking and rental car parking. So we know we're moving some of the rental car out, expanding the general use, and when it says add new, I guess that's what the new is the rental car area.
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, I skipped over that. They are reconfiguring and updating the parking that is over on that block where the hangar is now. Part of it will be, my understanding is general use, and part of it will be dedicated to rental car. I think the plan is to try to get the rental car activity out of the short-term lot, and so thereby increase the short-term capacity. That's the hope. We'll see how it works out. Good question. Non-potable water supply. Some years ago, we adapted some pipelines to create a non-potable water supply to support fire suppression systems. As development has occurred at the airport, there's more strain on that system, and portions of that system are older. At COSA DC, we are continuing advocates for development at the airport, and we need to consider whether the capacity and condition of that system in light of our ambition for continued development. So COSA DC has funded a study. We've signed that contract, and we're working with Shane and his folks. We have a mutual interest in determining that provides satisfactory flow and is in satisfactory condition, the COSA DC and the city. So we're working together on that, but COSA DC is funding it because COSA DC are the primary proponents or advocates for development at the airport. Once we get that back, I think the deadline in the contract is sometime in August to get us the results. But once we get that back, we'll be able to develop a plan or a strategy for improvements if necessary. We'll see where that takes us, where their study takes us. We're anticipating.
Power, are you saying backup power for all of the terminal, et cetera, or when you say pump station and backup power, specifically what are we looking at?
Well, I think they're thinking about a backup generator to provide electricity. So in the event that we lose electricity, that we can still utilize that system to put out fires. In other words, that system can still be pressurized to provide adequate pressure for fire suppression systems. Rail next, planes, trains.
No, go back to that slide.
Yes,
again.
ma'am.
Let me make sure I understand. Building improvements and adequacy to meet future expansions. So what are you talking about here?
Well, I think those are general statements. Building improvements, technically the Skyline project is an improvement to a building, plus it's an expansion. But we're hoping for more than that. For example, ASU is discussing the possibility of building classrooms out there. They are, I think it was either yesterday or today, meeting with airport personnel. I think it was yesterday they met with airport personnel to begin or to make progress on a contract for leasing a footprint out there, not far from the GTE hangar. And they would construct a new facility which would include classrooms, and either in this phase or in a future phase, they are contemplating hangars also. And so we would like that facility also to have adequate supply for a fire suppression system. But we're hoping for more than that. Remember that there's a runway out there that's going to close down, and that's going to open up significant property along the taxiway that could be developed both inside and outside the fence. And so in the hopes that we would attract some development in that way, we would like the systems to provide adequate capacity.
This airport, as you know, has been a long-term priority for the city council in terms of making it a bigger asset to the community in terms of usage, but also in terms of development. So this airport is considered one of our top priorities in terms of making it far more important and driver of the economy.
Yeah, Jeremy reminds us of that every time we resist in any way. But he and that board out there are very appreciative of council's support for the airport. Okay, trains, San Angelo Railport. This is, the photo here is a photo of our rail park, real train with real cars, with real loads in our park. That is a functioning rail park at this point. They continue to construct based on their needs, private enterprise, and they'll construct based on what their customers' needs are.
Transportation Commission yesterday, of course, the Transportation Commission is also over the rail in the state of Texas. And so they're definitely talking about rail. And we had an opportunity to talk about the rail port here in San Angelo, Texas.
Sounds good. One of the, a couple of notes. Michael Looney reported to us that our rail park is one of the few locations in the country where you can build a facility and have some control about where the rail is. If you want the rail to come through your warehouse so you can unload out of the weather, this is an opportunity. He says it's a real attention getter at this point. And so we're hoping that some development follows from that.
I think we should call it rail park, not port. Port almost makes everyone think it's on water, right?
Sounds good. One of the issues, it's not really an issue, it's just further, the next step in development would be the extension of water and wastewater utilities out there. And We have, on this issue, also started a discussion with city personnel because we have interests in common associated with that. It's not just, Shane touched on extending these services, but there may be some capacity opportunities on the city side in this part of town that the city we may want to take on together. And so at this point, we're having those conversations and viewing this part of that and some expansion on and updating on the city side as a project that we might take on together. We've also, I think, submitted some information to try to pursue some federal grants. So we're hoping those come through because the numbers got very large on this. I think
Shane said 3.5 million for the water sewer loop. Is that what you said?
I think that was just one.
Can't remember. It's
I
just
think,
water.
I think that was just water.
Water.
Yeah, sewer
Just
was,
nod your head, Shane, just nod. Say-
You don't have to walk up here. Just make a big nod or like this or something that. Thank you.
And I think our recent lift station bids caused Bob's update on that to go up. And I think at some point I heard the
Go
number.
ahead, come on forward. Backwards,
Five-
forward,
5
backwards,
million
forward.
for sewer.
I think I heard something about 10 to 15 million.
That's what I had heard at one point.
The lift station would be roughly, based on the numbers we just got back in for the Lake Nasworthy project, be roughly 5 million, 5.5 million on the lift station. And so, and that's the lift station. Of course, there is some piping that would have to occur with that. Now, one of the other issues is, as we start talking about water capacity for the rail park area, again, we talked about the elevated storage tank up in that kind of that northeast quadrant of town. That's where we start getting into the 11 to 15 million.
I knew it was going to be big. Shane doesn't walk across the room for less than $10 million. Any other questions or things we should talk about on the San Angelo Rail Park?
Sooner or later, I'm sure, about the expansion, the additional property that might be needed, and the city owns it, so we're protected from that perspective.
We are, and of course, I've got my Costa DC hat on, and I'll be looking for a very favorable rate on that land. We touched earlier on I-27. The next two slides are I-27 and I-14. I think kind of a significant milestone was reached this year. Didn't I-27 receive its federal?
Received the federal designation of a future interstate. We were already considered a high priority traffic, but we got interstate designation, and then in April, we also got the formal designation of the number. So until you get a number, you're an interstate approved, but you're not a numbered interstate. And we now have the official I-27 designation for the entire route of New Mexico and Texas.
Outstanding. Congratulations. The mayor has represented the city for some time on that, and I'm sure she's proud of that work. The concerning thing I heard earlier was designation for different segments, and our segment didn't have enough political support.
Well, that was what originally had been requested, Michael, was $1.2 billion for planning and construction of the entire, or planning and engineering of the entire corridor from Laredo to basically Amarillo. And then we submitted separate segments, because we're 3 segments, we're segment 2. So we provided statistics on each of those segments, but we had to prioritize those segments. And so we made segment 3 the #1 priority, because a lot, even in our segment 2, either is 2-lane with passing lanes, or from San Angelo to Big Spring is 4-lane. It's not 4-lane divided with frontage roads, but it's 4-lane, and then from Big Spring, it's the same thing. So things will happen in steps, but the most important part is getting it out of Laredo to Sonora. And interstates are, You can't put up a sign that says you're a designated future interstate. No, signs are permitted unless you already are connected to an interstate, and we are not. So we cannot put up any signs or any designations for that. And then interstates have to connect with interstates. And we will be, because I-20 and Big Spring will connect to our 87 loop or I-27 loop, and in Sonora to I-10 or I-20. And so ultimately, we'll be able to do that. But the rule is no signage, no anything until you're connected to a future interstate with your interstate connection.
COSA-DC continues to pay for the memberships for both of those, but the mayor has been our representative in those groups. Industrial Park. Phase 1, there were no property sales in 2022. There's approximately 24.6 acres still available in Phase 1. I'll give you a financial summary here in a minute. Phase 2, we had a little brush clearing project this year. That's complete, and we have a 9-acre parcel under contract. We anticipate that will sell this year. In summary,
one of the things that came up in conversation about our industrial park is that we haven't established some specific guidelines as it relates to what the facilities must look like. In other words, do we want just metal buildings, or do we want something more brick or stone oriented, something that makes it a higher, I don't want, maybe
Brings
higher
value.
end,
It brings value to
brings
more
better
part of the-
value to it. And I think I would ask that somewhere along the line, whether it's, that it needs to be discussed in COSA-DC, perhaps what we want the industrial park to look like.
that's an excellent point, and I'm going to jump ahead to future needs, because one of the issues, we talked about the intersection of the interstates when they come through. I can still remember the first time I came through San Angelo, and I came in the north part of town. It's a West Texas town. And then I can still remember crossing the river for the first time. I looked upstream, and I can still see, looking upstream, going southbound on Bryan, what a beautiful spot. And it made a significant impression. There are going to be lots of people, we think, traveling on those interstates, and that's going to be their first impression of San Angelo. So things like, I don't know if it's a bigger comprehensive planning issue or if it's just a industrial park.
Who do we want to look like?
Right. What impression do we want to make? So I don't know if it's a big plan kind of an issue, but I think when that comes through, we want to put the pressure on TxDOT for making it look good. And we may, I'm not sure I'm not a planner, so what do we do to make that corridor attractive to people who are just being introduced to San Angelo? And so whether that is part of a bigger plan or if it becomes a small piece on its own, I think that's something we need to think about. And whether that's a COSA-DC funded item, I don't know if that's legal, but people who know something about real estate should be in the loop on that and participate in, just like the comment about what should our industrial park look like, what should it look like from when you're going over those overpasses, going around San Angelo? What do we want people to see?
Mayor?
So,
Yes, Tommy, please.
Michael, I'm sitting when you're to the mayor's point. I do remember a conversation in COSA-DC some years back about early in the life of the park, business park, appearance standards. Now, whether they were ever adopted or okay,
you're right. There were some
we had
discussion about
conversations
covenants.
about that.
I don't know if we ever passed them or
Okay,
not. We'll
okay,
have to dig that up.
You might drag that up and see what the discussion was to have another jumping off point for a new discussion.
I think that's good if there was an initial discussion.
There
Seeing
was.
what it was, because it hasn't been executed, and it was brought to our attention this year that it seems as though, and I don't mean this to, that we're just so happy someone bought some acreage that we don't worry about what they put up. And not that anybody's put up anything that's unattractive, so I'm not criticizing what is there. But the point is, do we need to have some parameters?
Well, the reason I think I even remember the discussion, we dug down into the weeds so much that we got to talking about landscaping. And were we going to require any kind of landscape, not in a grand scheme, but just something that gave some feel to it, that we, trees, shrubs, whatever. Anyway,
Well, I think to your point, Tommy, that when we talked about the landscape ordinance a minute ago, when John James was up here, we allowed some of our commercial development to happen, let's say out there where perhaps on Sherwood Way, where, I can't think of the names now, but anyway, we have very little landscape parameters. So you could basically put up a lot of buildings, put some parking spot designations, and no requirement for trees, shrubs, grass, whatever. So we have these big parking lots and prominent areas and some big buildings, no trees, no grass, no anything. And that doesn't read well. I think we could read better. But again, I think we have to make sure that we look at and understand who we want to look like, how we want to feel, without putting too much burden and expense onto a development, but adding quality to our city.
Anyway, where I was headed is that those interstates are going to be somewhat the new gateways into San Angelo, at least from those directions. And we've had some gateway projects that we think make an improvement, and we just need to be mindful of that. And
I get lots of positive comments on all of those gateways that we did over the past 2 years, and particularly the one into downtown and the one at the airport. Lots of positive comments and feedback.
all right, well, I skipped ahead this slide, then didn't talk about anything on it, so I better. Workforce development has become a topic in nearly every project that we talk about, so we need to be mindful of that. We are continuing to hear, we started hearing about quality of life initiatives and placemaking. That has not faded. We still hear about that kind of thing. And so, at least for me, I've kind of begun developing a mindset with limited financial resources. We want to preserve our cash by, and one of those, for those projects where we need cash, and one of the methods would be to ask council to be willing to be open-minded about providing tax abatements. Abating values, increased values for a short period of time so that we can make projects attractive. I'm not asking for anything today, just for you to be aware that you may see some of that out of us in an effort to preserve cash, because we're hearing some of you talk about quality of life projects where we'll need the cash to invest in a local project, in a local eligible
I
project.
refer us back to, guess what? The 2009 strategic plan that very much lays out a vision for placemaking, quality of life. And if we follow this vision laid out in 2009, it's amazing how much of all of those issues get addressed in this document. We don't need to recreate another document. It might need some updating. I'm not sure, because we haven't fully understood what 2009 fantastic plan laid out for us, and it is about placemaking. Many of the things I read earlier today was San Angelo making it a place. Whether you call it placemaking or a place, this is what this document laid out for us. And what we will probably need is the opportunity to go to COSA DC to help fund some of those, quote, place-making value improvements.
Well, on that note, COSA DC had its annual meeting earlier this week, but they postponed the strategic planning portion of the meeting because they wanted to hear your thoughts and your priorities before they began working on theirs. So that group is ready to link with you in pursuit of those objectives.
And I'm not sure, honestly, and it's probably something we need to do, is provide to the COSA DC members this visioning part of the San Angelo Strategic Plan, which lays out a great quality of life, placemaking, strategic plans, and things to consider. Because it should be the guiding document we use and the guiding document that they use in combination with visiting with us to implement placemaking decisions. It's well laid out.
All right. I think that's all I have for you. Do you have any questions or comments or
questions for
direction
Michael?
for me?
Thank you very much.